Opening the center immediately creates dynamic possibilities and fights for key squares. A hypermodern sidestep, inviting white's central pawn storm to prepare a flank counterstrike. Asserting central dominion, d4 immediately challenges black's pawn structure and prepares to deploy white's pieces for an active game. The fianchettoed bishop now eyes the long diagonal, a potent threat against white's central control. Unlocking central control, knight prepares to launch an assault on black's kingside, creating potential for tactical fireworks. Solidifying the center and preparing to castle, this move opens up the queen and allows for a robust pawn structure. Solidifying central control while preparing for queenside expansion, offering a robust pawn structure. Developing the knight to a natural square like f6 actively challenges white's central pawn structure and prepares for kingside castling. Developing this bishop strategically fortifies the kingside and prepares for potential castling, while eyeing the central d4 pawn. Securing the monarch is paramount, initiating a fundamental defensive maneuver that fortifies the king's sanctuary and prepares for future middle-game operations. Securing the king's safety now opens avenues for development and central pressure. Developing the knight to c6 solidifies central control and prepares for potential pawn breaks, but watch for a pawn on c4. Connecting the rooks and preparing for central expansion, this repositioning subtly enhances attacking potential. Boldly challenging the center, this pawn thrust aims to unravel the compact pawn structure and exploit the open lines it creates. Preventing the bishop's unwelcome diagonal intrusion secures the kingside's tranquility for now. Reinforcing the e-pawn and preparing to challenge white's central pawn chain offers black valuable space and activity. Developing the knight to d2 creates a flexible outpost, preparing to reinforce the center or potentially initiate a kingside attack. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure defensively, this move preempts any immediate knight outposts or disruptive pawn pushes by white. This knight relocation prepares to contest the central d-file, while simultaneously opening a diagonal for the queen. Establishing a flexible pawn structure, this bishop aims to support the central d6 pawn while preparing for a potential queenside expansion, or simply finding a more active diagonal. Shifting the bishop here opens up the c-file and supports a future queenside pawn push. A vital repositioning for the queen, aiming to connect rooks and potentially support central pawn advances. Targeting the queenside is the primary goal now, setting up potential breakthroughs. Expanding on the queenside probes the pawn structure, potentially disrupting white's queenside harmony and creating future play. Solidifying the queenside advance prevents black from easily generating counterplay on that wing. Venturing the knight to the edge of the board may seem passive, but it prepares for a potential kingside assault, eyeing h4. Challenging black's pawn structure, white aims to disrupt coordination and potentially exploit the isolated queen's pawn. Reasserting central presence, the knight now contests white's bishop battery and prepares for a potential kingside pawn push. Opening the d-file solidifies control and prepares potential piece pressure. The knight vacates the potentially crowded queenside for a centralizing journey, eyeing d7 as a future hub. Opening the d-file offers white central influence and potential pawn breaks, creating new tactical avenues. Reclaiming the central pawn solidifies black's pawn structure and prepares to develop pressure on the d-file. Unlocking the d-file for immense pressure. Reclaiming the center with the knight redirects, attacking pressure and opens lines for piece coordination. A subtle repositioning aims to bolster the kingside defenses and prepare for a potential kingside pawn storm, eyeing weaknesses in black's castled position. Unleashing the knight's potential, this aims to challenge white's centralized control and open tactical avenues. Concentrating pressure on the d-file, this rook now eyes weaknesses in black's position while preparing a dynamic repositioning. Challenging white's queenside pawn structure, this move injects dynamism into the game. Centering the rook on the d-file fortifies control and prepares for potential pawn breaks. The knight now aims to secure central squares, preparing a potential queenside expansion. Recapturing the pawn immediately intensifies the central pressure, forcing black to consider how to reorganize their pieces after this forceful exchange. Challenging white's queenside control while preparing to potentially activate the knight. Sacrificing the bishop opens lines, aiming to exploit black's potentially exposed king. Gaining an open queen file, black solidifies their central pawn structure while white sacrifices material for questionable initiative. Seizing the initiative by capturing the pawn opens up lines and creates immediate tactical pressure on black's pieces. Reclaiming central space and initiating a kingside assault, this piece repositions for immediate pressure on white's center. Securing the d-file's dominance for a knight outpost while threatening black's queen. Shielding the king from the encroaching cavalry, while developing a counterplay on the queen's side, seems the priority. Securing the knight on f3 establishes a vital outpost, preparing to launch a counterattack and solidify the center. Reclaiming central influence and reinforcing the e7 square seems logical, though potentially passive. This redeployment threatens to dismantle black's queenside pawn structure and seize the d-file, forcing a critical defensive decision. Sacrificing the queen for initiative seems overly optimistic given the exposed king. A bold queen sacrifice to pry open lines and create pawn weaknesses for the opponent's isolated monarch. Opening up the central files offers dynamic counterplay, potentially pinning the exposed white king. King hunting begins as the rook forces a crucial exchange and exposes the weakened royal position. The rook's capture on the 7th rank, though seemingly forcing, surrenders crucial central control. Forcing the queen trade opens up the d-file and aims to exploit the exposed black king. Acknowledging the inevitable exchange, black gently repositions the monarch to a safer corner, preparing for the impending rook endgame. Reasserting pressure, the rook infiltrates, forcing a defensive realignment and eyeing further infiltration. Anchoring the pawn chain reinforces black's queenside structure and prepares for a potential queenside pawn push. This knight repositions to a more active central outpost, preparing to pressure black's pawn structure and potential weaknesses. This knight's journey to d3 injects a dynamic attacking presence, aiming to disrupt white's consolidated pawn structure. Reactivating the knight to centralize and apply pressure on black's weakened dark squares. A bold attempt to disrupt white's rook's dominance on the 7th rank, but it leaves the knight somewhat exposed and the queenside pawns vulnerable. Unleashing a potent discovered check, white exposes black's king to immediate danger across the diagonal. Sacrificing the knight this way opens lines towards the king, but it's a desperate attempt to disrupt white's queenside advantage. The knight's sacrifice opens the crucial g-file, targeting the exposed black king and potentially forcing a swift endgame. The king's retreat aims to consolidate defenses, though the g5 square now feels quite exposed. Unleashing the rook's power to force the enemy king into a desperate corner. Relocating the bishop to a passive square cedes the initiative and allows white's rook to dominate the 7th rank. Eliminating the knight solidifies white's material advantage, simplifying into a winning endgame. Snatching the pawn offers an immediate material gain, but the knight's isolation on the queenside invites powerful counterplay for white's king. Securing the rook on the 2nd rank now initiates a strategic endgame transition, aiming to exploit black's exposed knight.